Welcome, welcome, one and all. Once again, I'm so happy to hear that song again. It's been a little while since I've heard it. Welcome to the very first of hopefully many great Trotec podcasts about Ruby. I'm going to jump right into it, but I want to welcome anyone watching live and anyone watching this in the future, whether it be on YouTube, Facebook, anywhere. We're always happy to have you. We're going to be trying to do these at least for the next few months on every third Thursday. So if you have any questions, we'll be sending out a link, I think not too long after the podcast goes live, so that you guys can submit your own questions about Ruby. The most important thing for us is that we can communicate with you guys and get a chance to answer your questions. If there's anything, as it says in the chat, anything you'd like to ask, feel free to add it in the chat. And as we go along, we will try and grab as many questions as we can. Nothing is off the table as long as it is Trotec related. We are not trying to get in trouble today. I am joined by two very capable gentlemen, and I will direct most of your questions to them. I am here purely for the aesthetics and for the clout. I am joined from our Canadian office in Toronto by Tim. How are you, sir?
Doing good. Very excited. Finally got a Ruby seminar.
Yes.
I'm very excited.
The people have been clamoring.
Yep.
And also joined from, are you out of Michigan, Dave?
I'm out of Phoenix, Arizona.
Out of Phoenix, Arizona. My apologies.
No worries.
Bright and beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. I'm assuming bright and beautiful because I've never heard of Phoenix.
Well, it's 119 degrees Fahrenheit today, so beautiful is, in the eye of the beholder.
Yes, bright and bright and bright and beautiful.
Right.
How are you?
Good. Welcome, everyone. Laser Dave here. I'm happy to be a part of this little panel. Kind of explain a lot of the different questions that you may have as you use and operate Ruby software, come up to difficulties, questions, comments, concerns. We're here to answer any of those type of questions today.
I'm really excited. I think this is something we were all sort of speaking about it before the stream started, but this is something that we've wanted to do, as Tim alluded to, for a little while. I think we are all either big Ruby fans or Ruby converts. I personally, in the beginning, I will admit that I was a little bit skeptical. And the more that I've used Ruby, I recently had occasion to go back and use job control for a particular machine. And it is stunning to me when you get used to how convenient Ruby is, how fully featured it feels in comparison to going back to job control. It's not to say I don't love job control. I do. I always will. It's my first love. But Ruby just feels like such a step in the right direction. I want to kick things off. I think we'll get right into it here. I think we've only got about an hour today, so I want to get right into the questions. I'll throw this out there. There's a very good question right from the chat, I think, right away. So before we get into any of the basics, I mean, again, chat's got to come first here. Is there now or will there ever be an outline trace feature in Ruby? Dave, I'm going to throw that to you, sir.
Yeah, that's a great question. And absolutely, there is an outline trace. It's already available on Ruby. I believe it came out in the 2.5 version. And it basically gives you the outline trace. If you watch my training seminar on our YouTube channel, it'll walk through and show you how that process works. I've also recently posted a video specifically for that that takes children's drawings and crayon drawings and then literally traces them right in Ruby and then outlines it. And here, if we can actually showcase how this process works, it's literally a little trace tool. It looks like a little pencil sitting on the top of a mountain here. You want to show where it's at there? There it is right there. Yeah, the outline trace, it works well. You can, when you click it, you can identify if it's just outside. If it's inside, you can basically adjust it, the smoothness, the smooth level, and then you can actually trace the graphic. Has to be a vector-based or a non-vector-based graphic. So pick PNG, JPEG, bitmap type graphic for this process to work. And so in this case, it was a pixelated image that was then traced on the outline, creating an outline. And so you can turn your pixelated graphics into a cut path.
Have you found that it works particularly well for things, certain things over others? I mean, me personally, I found that for vectorizing logos in Ruby in particular, it can be really, really great. I mean, things that are kind of, graphically simple and kind of, easier for the trace perhaps to
yeah, it holds true with any trace of any design software. The better the quality, the pixelated graphic, and the more consistent the color, the better the trace becomes. However, the lower the resolution, lots of fuzzy gradients and stuff like that, it's going to struggle, just like any trace program will have. And so the better your pixelated image is, the better your trace is going to be.
Yeah, that's very fair. I wanted to kind of ask a very general question. I don't mean to throw Tim a really hard one right off the very beginning here, but I want to say, if you wanted to define Ruby kind of generally, sort of, how do you explain Ruby? What's the elevator pitch for Ruby, and sort of how does it stand apart from maybe job control in general?
Right. Well, job control in the past is using a printer driver to send in a design from our graphic design software into our own dedicated laser cutting software. So in the middle, we have a little printer driver sending everything along to our software. And typically, we'd either run into some issues with this printer driver or there'd be a bit of a slowdown. And job control was a bit limited in how we can control our design file after it's been sent in. So we'd always have to go a bit back and forth between our design software and job control if we wanted to fix, let's say, a line width, or even rotate an item easily, or easily just change the size, the rotation of an item. Ruby has an easier way of implementing this. We're simply going to save off our file as the file type that we're using. So be it CorelDRAW, Adobe Illustrator, PDF, SVG, EPS, DXF, DWG, and I think 2 or 3 more other file types. And once we upload it into Ruby, that file then goes through our own processing and becomes a laser cutting file. So there's no need for a printer driver anymore. We're simply importing our design files in. So this already gets rid of a big player that caused a lot of issues within job control. And then once it's in Ruby, since the file's been dissected by our software, we can now take control and make little tweaks, little edits to our design file. So we can make scale changes. We can rotate our design. We could add line widths. We could remove the filling and stroke of an object and invert them. So we could actually make the filling become the stroke. And like we saw before, we could add outline traces to our items now. We could import photos, and the photos are automatically created into grayscale vectors. So they're already optimized for photo engraving. I could go on forever, but essentially we've made it in such a way so that once you've uploaded your file into Ruby, there's no need to worry about where is this file in my computer directory? Is it being communicated correctly? Is the machine going to see it correctly? Ruby will show you the file as it's going to be engraved and cut.
Absolutely. So I think you touched on something that's really important too. I think this is something you and I talked about the other day, Dave, and I just want to touch on this really quickly. You were talking about how the trace feature compares to tracing in other software. Tim, you were talking about the ways that it stands apart from job control, or taking an Illustrator file, a PSD file, whatever it might be. Does Ruby replace your graphic design software? Are we asking that our customers use Ruby in place of Corel or Illustrator or Photoshop?
No, absolutely not. I mean, that is the one thing. I mean, Ruby is a powerful tool. As Tim mentioned, it has so many tools. And in my opinion, it's 1,000 times better than any other method, including job control. Job control had its benefits, but Ruby it's light years ahead in its control factor. But it is not an advanced graphic design software. And because of this, you still want to use those advanced tools that have been developed over decades to design your graphics. And so making those minutia filter changes and using different layers and transparencies and all the different tools that are available in these high-level graphic design software, such as CorelDRAW, Adobe Illustrator, CAD programs, are still relevant. This is why Ruby supports all those design software formats, DXF, CorelDRAW format, AI formats, and then you can drag them directly into Ruby once those files are complete. And so by no means does it replace it. It can run files from scratch, but very basic in its capability. It's not going to give you the ability to do a lot of really advanced graphic capabilities. And so this is why Ruby works in tandem with your advanced graphic software if you're an advanced operator. However, if you're not, you can design right from Ruby and start from scratch, but it's just going to give you pretty basic capabilities compared to those advanced softwares.
I think, yeah, that's a very good point. And it's also, I think as we've sort of alluded to here, Ruby will always be about optimizing what you already have as opposed to being necessarily a creation tool. So I think I really liked how Tim put it, where he was talking about how you can make some of those edits and changes specifically to optimize something for laser, be it changing, the thickness of a line, be it fixing a typo, whatever it might be. But we don't necessarily expect our customers to start and end with Ruby. We're not trying to replace whatever software makes you the most comfortable, particularly because, we're fortunate enough to have customers who work with all different kinds of software, be it AutoCAD software, like 3D type software with vector-based image. I mean, everything across the board. We've got some great questions coming in here through the chat, so I want to throw these out to you guys. I will say, for anybody who's adding questions in the chat, I mean, first and foremost, thank you so much for all the discussion. We're going to try and grab all of these. For anything that concerns a potential bug or something that we do not necessarily know the answer to, what I'll say is we'll take that away. Anything that we don't know the answer to or we can't help you with right here, we're going to take that and bring it to our team in Austria, the kind of QA HQ team, and we will try and bring it back to you at the next session next month. So if there's anything that we can try and find, what is the answer to this question that we don't know right away, we're going to try and bring that to you. And we have Lev and Corey here in the back end who popped up this really helpful roadmap for us. This gives you an idea of the features that are coming to Ruby either this year, next year, and in the coming years. So not only am I excited to see the feedback that you guys are sharing, but I hope you'll share it with us right in Ruby too. I mean, the best way that we can know what it is that you want to see coming to Ruby is by you giving us that feedback right in the software. There's a dedicated button, a dedicated function just to do that. And I hope you'll continue to send us, what you want to see, because that helps us to know what we should prioritize and what we should add to the software next. I know especially there are certain things that we see a lot of, and I'm always excited to see that feedback coming in. So, but let's grab some of these great questions from the chat. I'm going to scroll over here and grab a few of them. Timothy, thank you so much. The API is coming up next year, 100%. That's one of those ones that is very, very popular. I will say, I can't lie about that. Multi-line text is another one. If I didn't mention that, Mr. Clark from our Toronto office would have my head. We've got a great question here from Wooten Designs about doing an outline trace feature. I want to throw this over to you, Dave. If somebody is looking to do an outline trace, but they don't have access to a camera, so they're looking to try and optimize using Ruby to, place their artwork somewhere on their item that they're engraving, is there anything in Ruby that they can do or a best practice that maybe they can follow?
Well, you of course with the red dot pointer is the easiest way if you don't have an overhead camera. Those are the two best methods to actually place a graphic onto the screen. If you have the overhead camera system, it's ideal. You can also copy and paste it into your graphic software, scale it to match your page size, and you can position your graphics and design them in there and then bring them in, match the orientation that way. Red dot pointer has always been the easiest. You position it with the pointer, and then you can snap your graphic to that pointer in any of the 9 specific snap points: top, center, along the middle, center, bottom, and then position your graphic that way. And of course, the newest overhead camera is ideal for positioning graphics, giving you the visual live feedback to the laser system for positioning your graphics onto the material part.
Totally. One of the reasons I really wanted to bring that up as well. So just to clear up any speculation, I had a customer ask me about this week. The camera is designed, unless I'm mistaken, to work with the new run on Ruby machines. Is that right? So it's sort of built to work specifically with the 360 and 400 that are run on Ruby. Tim, would you be able to tell me kind of what a run on Ruby machine is, like how it's separate from a typical Speedy machine? If you have a Speedy now, why I might consider a run on Ruby, or why I could be excited about run on Ruby kind of thing?
Right. So the way that our new machines work with our Ruby software, there are 2 important aspects to remember about how we communicate our files to the machine. So each customer has a computer that is physically connected to the machine. Even a run on Ruby machine has a computer attached to it. A standard machine like a Speedy 100 and a Speedy 300, they use a physical cable connection between their computer and their machine to send over designs and communicate with the machine. With a Speedy 100 and 300 machine style, you could also connect remotely to the PC connected to the Speedy 100 and 300. This is in principle how the run on Ruby machine works as well. You have an internal PC inside of the machine connected physically to all the boards that are running the machine. You are simply remotely connecting to that internal PC. So instead of having a hardwired connection, you could be anywhere within the network of the building that your machine's plugged into, and you could send jobs to that machine via the remote connection. Now with Speedy 100 and 300, you have, of course, the option of using the computer directly attached to the machine, but as an additional option, you could also connect remotely to that computer, send files to that computer, and then go to the machine using its main computer, send jobs through. So it's a difference of having a machine connected to the network and you connecting to it via the network and sending in the files, versus having the computer directly attached to the machine and just working from that computer right directly into the laser cutter.
Yeah, That's a very concise answer. And also, I will say, mandatory little plug. If you'd like to see a runner movie machine in person, we would definitely invite you to come into your local Trotec and check one out. They are very, very cool to hear about, but even cooler to see in person. I wanted to go to one of our pre-screen kind of questions here, because I think this is one that's really, really important. Again, it kind of gets at the basics of using Ruby, but I want to be sure that we cover it off. How do I know if a line will be cut or engraved? Is it by thickness like it's done in job control? Do we have to worry quite so much about that? Timmy kind of touched off on this a little bit. I think we even might have a video to be able to show this off. But Dave, would you be able to sort of give us an idea, and we'll see if we can pull up that video?
Yeah, I mean, in the past, and this is something that's been a problem in the laser industry for decades. I mean, depending on your line thickness and color and stuff like that will determine whether or not it engraves or if it cuts. Now, the benefit of Ruby is we've eliminated that problem. So it's only dependent on the color. So even if the line thickness is very thick, it will still engrave. And I actually just created a video that hasn't been posted. We can go ahead and play that and actually show this process. If you have the video.
Let's see if we can pull it up here. We'll tell you what, even if we don't, we can always come back to it, because
Not finding it.
Any good questions in the chat.
No worries. I mean, I can explain it more. And so in essence, even if you have a half a point line width and you go to actually, if it is the color red, the Ruby software is nice because it'll actually see, no matter what that line thickness is, it will see that laser line as a cut path. And so if you have a thick black line and a thick red line, the laser will see the thick black line and engrave that thick black line. And so just as you see it on the screen, it'll engrave it. But then it'll see that thick red line. And because it is red and that red color is identified as a cut path, it will still cut that line. And so you won't actually get that thick look. And it eliminates the issue, say it's using job control and other brands out there, where you literally have to have a specific line thickness for the laser to identify it as a cut path.
I think we've got the video here too, so we can kind of cover that off, but I thought you explained it really well. This was something too that I think was always frustrating for me. And I want to, when I first began at Trotec, it was not only the fact that you had to have specifically lines of a particular thickness in order for the laser to understand them, but it was also that it varied from software to software. So if you were using Corel, you had to know that it had to be a hairline. If you were using Illustrator, you had to know that it was a particular thickness of stroke.
Certain thickness, correct.
Ruby, it really, really frees you up to sort of just select. This
eliminates all those issues completely.
Exactly. Okay, so let's see this video, please.
Software. A line thickness can vary, but depending on the color will determine the laser's final reaction. I have some squares and circles with thick and thin lines in this example. As you can see, the thin black and red lines are 0.1 inches, and the thick black and red lines are 0.15 inches. The only difference is the color. When different thicknesses of lines are sent to the prepare screen by selecting Create a Job, you may notice that the thick red lines will show thin again when sent to the prepare screen. This is because the color red is seen as a cut path in the material's parameter, meaning no matter what the line thickness is set for, the laser will see this color as a cut path, showing it as a thin line in the prepare screen. When this kind of file is sent to the laser to process, the black lines will engrave just like the original design. But since the red is a cut path, any thickness will show thin and simply cut the design with the laser because the parameter was set to cut red in this example.
I'd just like to point out too that not only was that informative, but also you got really nice results on that wood. That looked really good.
Well, I kind of know what I'm doing.
Yes, this is true. If anybody hasn't watched, you mentioned it quickly before, Dave, but if anybody hasn't watched Dave's recent video on Ruby, you can find it on the Trotec USA channel. You can find it on our Canadian channel. I absolutely beg of you, take the time. It is worth your time to watch it. It is absolutely, the most informative video as far as I'm concerned on our YouTube channels right now about Ruby. Yes, thank you so much to Lev in the background here showing this off. Not only that, but there is a ton of other content on there. So if there ever is a question you have about Ruby and you're waiting for this podcast to come back up around, don't hesitate to check out our YouTube channels. There is a lot of great stuff on there. Let me come to another question from the chat here. I had one that I had picked out. Here it is from Ashford Lasers, asking about importing fonts and why does the font size change? Have either of you gentlemen ever seen that happen? I know, in my understanding, when you're using Ruby, you have access to all of the fonts that are currently installed on that computer, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm not familiar with importing fonts directly into the software, or perhaps they're talking about when you bring in a file and the font size seems to change after you've brought in the file.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what they mean by this. I mean, because when you bring in the actual design file, it's going to bring it in as it was designed. And if you import an actual font, that font actually is brought in as a font, and then you can access it and adjust that font within the design screen. But it should not change the font size unless the font is not included in Ruby, and then it'll substitute another font, and then it may change it that way. And if that's what you're meaning.
Gotcha.
Tim, have you come across anything like this?
I have, yes. And
Okay.
I typically see it on files that are SVGs, or at the beginning of Ruby, there were some slight issues where if you had different unit of measurements, it would confuse the system. So, but that hasn't been happening around for a good while. So if the file is an SVG, you may need to look into the back end of the SVG file, make sure that it's not scaling up or down any of the fonts that you're using. And of course, the best method of getting rid of any issues with fonts in Ruby is to always vectorize the fonts before you send them in. We want to make sure that whatever text we're sending into Ruby, it's not seen as text anymore. It's simply seen as a vector. Then at that point, Ruby won't be able to make any changes to its size or whatever class of font it is.
Yeah, the other drawback of that is when they need to edit that font, and that's why they bring them in.
Yes.
So, but the other thing too, as Tim mentioned, is this was an issue on some of the earlier versions. So make sure you update your version. Make sure you are running the latest and greatest. Some of those old bugs that may have been the case are no longer in most cases.
I think that may be the case with our next question here too, but I want to throw this out there as long as we're talking about SVGs. Paul asked a great question. Is there a setting to allow me with Ruby when he imports a file that's an SVG that does not add sort of a margin around it automatically? So he's saying there's an example. I draw a 100mm square with a line thickness of 0.25mm and send it to Ruby. And it appears in Ruby as a 100mm square with a small margin around it. Is that anything that you guys would have seen before? I'm not really familiar with SVG files so much, if I'm honest. I'm a bit spoiled.
Yeah, I mean, SVG is just a generalized vector format. It's not really tied to a specific brand or software type. The only time I've seen margins come in, it really depends on how that image was generated. So, for example, if you have a screen or a page size that was around that SVG when it was generated, that filter or how it was actually converted to an SVG is what is actually brought in. So, for example, if you were to import a CorelDRAW file into Ruby and your page size was a certain page, you'll notice your image may still be that same size on that page size. Converting to an SVG is the same thing. It's basically, again, going to, however it's exported or converted to an SVG, the surrounding page or box or whatever it's located in, it may bring that box in. And this is why you would want to select the little button to basically eliminate those margins, a little margin button within Ruby to fix that problem. It's a click of a button to solve that and adjust those margins right in Ruby. So it is a quickly correctable thing, but it usually is the case caused by how that SVG was originally created.
That makes sense. Can I ask a quick question too of Tim? You mentioned making sure that the units in your file and in Ruby are the same. Do you mean literally the physical? So if I'm designing a file using millimeters and then I bring it to Ruby and Ruby is set to use inches, obviously that can kind of skew mine.
Yeah. We want to ideally keep it in the same unit of measurements. Ruby only has, I believe, 2 decimal points to go by. So if you're using, let's say, 3 decimal points in inches, it might not convert or might round up in millimeters.
Yeah, we'll round it.
I didn't realize that. That's interesting. Okay. Wow. Okay. I want to grab this great question here from Timothy. So even though it is not replacing our design software, will there be advancements to the design aspects in Ruby? Dave, I'll throw that over to you. You're already nodding.
Yeah. There's no question. Yeah, the Ruby is going to continue to evolve. And as we showed, as Don showed earlier, we kind of have an outline of what's coming in Ruby. And so there will be more and more features. I mean, like, for example, the trace feature didn't exist recently. The array feature wasn't there originally. These features are continuously coming. More and more tools will be added, making it more and more powerful. And, you know, eventually it may very well be to where you can, instead of doing basic type designing, you'll be able to do, you know, mid-level type designing. And eventually, who knows? I mean, as time goes by with any type of software like this, it's going to become more and more powerful to the point where it may not be necessary to go back and forth to those more advanced softwares to even create designs from scratch. And so, yeah, that is something that is a goal, to make Ruby a complete standalone over time, and build in more and more of these features to make it more convenient and user friendly for you folks out there using it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great summation. I wanted to just have a quick aside here to say hello to everybody who's watching once again. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Please keep submitting your questions. I'm just going to keep grabbing them here out of the chat. There is one that we had prepared ahead of time that I really wanted to come back to. That Dave, you mentioned about keeping Ruby updated. So,
yes.
You know, make sure you're always using the latest and greatest to make sure any of those ancient bugs hopefully might have been squashed already. How often is Ruby updated? Is it a quarterly thing? Is it a yearly thing? Is it something that we can look forward to sporadically? You know, how often do you expect to see those updates come through?
Currently, it's updated 4 times a year, typically quarterly on the about once every 3 months, I would say, is about where it comes out. And so new features are going to come out. There's also a little like notes that indicate the new features in there. And if you go to rubyhelp.com, it's going to typically give you release notes that kind of show you all the new capabilities. Shortly after, I will typically produce a video or some type of content that showcases the new features. So yeah, if you keep up to date, your Ruby software will automatically tell you there's an update. You don't have to search for it. You don't have to click a button to determine if there's a new update. It's going to prompt you on your screen of your computer or on your screen of your Run on Ruby machine to say, hey, there's a new update. Click here. You know, takes a couple minutes, automatically does everything for you in the background, and then says, hey, you're running the new version. So it's that simple. So it makes it completely mindless. You know, if you've got a couple minutes, make sure you always click that button. This way you'll keep up with the latest and greatest.
Totally. You can see, I'm sure Tim does the same thing in Ontario, but anytime that there's a new Ruby update, you can catch me in the start of my day just walking around to every single computer inside of our showroom, just walking from one to the next, to the next, to the next, just update. Yeah. Another quick question here. I just actually, let me just quickly stop on this. So Ashford Lasers mentions that they have Ruby on there. They mentioned the Q400, but I think they may even be referring either the Q400 or the R400 also now recently has Ruby updated. I wanted to say we have the roadmap up here on the screen, so that's why I wanted to touch on this. Ruby will be coming to our other machines as well. There isn't necessarily a set date for that, but if you have a speed marker or one of our large format machines, you can start to get excited about Ruby coming to your machine sometime, you know, in 2023, 2024. We're all really excited to see it happen. So, you know, it's something that you can definitely look forward to in the kind of coming months, years, and things. A question here for, I'll throw over to you, Tim. Question from Candace. Tried to bring in 2 different graphic files into Ruby when using the overhead camera. It was not successful. Ruby kept wanting to exit the file and save before the new one could be brought in. So I assume we're talking about just direct import into Ruby.
Yeah.
Please, I mean.
Yeah. So whenever you are on the design page, you can only work with one design at a time. So once we head over to the prepare page, which is the page where we can actually position our designs, we're able to position multiple designs on the prepare page, actually. That is a page you're going to be working on to bring in more than one design at a time. It won't ask you to save before you bring it in. You're simply going to, let's actually get Ruby open on my screen here. Oh, where's the mouse? There we go. So once we are in and on the design page, this is currently right now one design that I have created. It's just the Trotec logo placed as is.
You heard it. Tim officially created the Trotec logo. This is
yes, I have.
Breaking news.
Just going to make this a bit smaller. Sorry, I'm just going to change the size of this because I realized it's a bit too big for my bed. We're going to fit to design, create our job here. So right now on my laser bed, this is one design. So if we head over to the right-hand side, we can see where we have this information listed as working area. Working area is now listed as this one design that I have placed on my bed. So if I do want to add in a secondary design to position on a loose scrap of acrylic, I'll actually open up the designs area on the prepare page, and I could add in another design by clicking on
We'll walk
the
through
arrow
how to
key.
upgrade
So
the
I could add
firmware
in
on a
a
Trotec.
secondary design here. So now I'll have two designs on my page at once. Now, compared to the design page, you can't actually have two designs on it at once, because once you open up one design, it opens up another. It'll ask you to save that other design before you open it up. You can copy and paste another design onto that page, but you could also simply make these two designs and then add them both at the same time onto the prepare page instead.
This is actually news to me. I didn't realize even that was, I assumed it was always sort of still limited to a single design at one time. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, the other thing is a lot of people realize too, you see the designs and the jobs. You can add as many designs to a job as you want, but you cannot add any additional jobs to an existing job. So if you select jobs, there's no way that you can bring two jobs together, because each job is actually assigned to a material. And so if one's set to cut acrylic and one's set to run wood, it won't allow them to put together. But if you have the original designs, you can put them into another design, put them onto another job, and you can do as many designs as you want onto a job, but you can't put additional jobs onto a design, if you can kind of understand that.
Yeah. No, and it's a tricky nomenclature too, especially, I mean, with Ruby available in multiple languages and things, but I always think of it too, jobs is always going to be in this third step here, like this third screen that you can see that's image showing right now. And then design is always going to be in that second step, that middle screen there with the pencil at the top. We sort of, we tipped our hand really quickly there, but we actually had a great video about updating firmware that I think Corey has prepared for us on the back end. Maybe we could just flop over to that video really fast. We can show that as long as we've got it ready to go.
Software. For this process to work, your computer will need access to the internet. With the laser machine on, open the Ruby software. Click the main drop-down menu inside the Ruby software. Select the Settings menu. Click the Service button, and this will open the Firmware Installation Wizard. Select Next to start a device firmware update. Click Disconnect. Now turn off the laser machine, then open the lid on the laser and turn the laser machine back on, leaving the lid up. Once the machine is fully on, click Next, and a firmware list will show up with all the different available firmware versions for the connected laser machine. This list will vary because there are many different models of the same type of laser system. Make sure you know your model and select the correct firmware. To confirm the correct version of firmware, locate the serial tag on the backside of the laser machine to determine the version of electronics. This example is 8069, but this number in the same location will vary based on the type of laser system you have. This example list is all the Speedy 360 versions of firmware. This list includes the 8032, which is an older style flex machine, the 8031, which is an older style fiber-only machine, the X8069 JPT. This is a current style flex machine with the JPT fiber laser. The X8069 IPG is a current style flex machine with the IPG fiber laser. The C8069 is a current style that is CO2 only. And finally, the 8030 is an old style CO2 only machine. Select your laser version from this list determined from reviewing your serial tag. After selecting the laser machine firmware version, click the Load New Firmware button and then select Validate to validate the chosen firmware. Once it is validated, click the Upload Firmware button. A warning will then show on the screen that the firmware will be updated, and to warn you not to turn off the laser during this process. Select Yes to proceed. Let the machine upload and install the firmware. This example is time-lapsed, but this process typically will take up to 3 minutes, depending on your internet and computer speeds. Be patient and do not turn off the laser machine or computer during this process. Once finished, a green Firmware Update Complete message will show up on the bottom right side of the screen. And if you have a Run on Ruby touchscreen, it will also show on this screen. Now close the laser lid, turn off the laser machine, wait 10 seconds, then turn the laser machine back on. The laser system firmware is now updated and ready for laser processing. If you have any questions or are unsure what firmware needs to be selected when updating your firmware, please don't hesitate to contact our support department before updating.
I particularly like that last note that you mentioned in there, Dave, about be sure to contact our support department before updating.
Yeah. You don't want to pick the wrong firmware. And I know, and I've learned it is a little bit confusing on which one because there are a lot of different versions of the same machine. The other thing I wanted to note too for you folks out there, updating the firmware is very important. For example, the latest Ruby 2.6 version came out, which is outstanding, and it has solved an issue that we've had in the past where, for example, when you're using the rotary would kind of rotate partway through your engraving and then rotate around and then continue on, which caused some problems and some lost material. That version 2.6 solved this problem. However, if you do not update the firmware, it did not resolve it. So not only do you need to update your version of Ruby, if you didn't click the button to update the firmware, the problem will still persist. So make sure you update that. And I'm working with our software team to see about prompting some people to update the firmware when Ruby is updated. But for now, you need to go in and click that button and make sure that Ruby is updated, or firmware is updated. I'm sorry.
Definitely. I want to pull up this question here from Tyler. It's a bit of a tricky one because it definitely is sort of customer dependent. So it definitely depends on the situation where Ruby is being installed. I think in terms of the network and remote access, there are only certain things that we can certainly say, definitively. One of them being that, unless I'm mistaken, and I'll ask this of Tim, but unless I'm mistaken, obviously, following installation of the software, Ruby can be run offline should you so choose. It can be run using a local host on your local computer, basically.
That is correct. So once you,
I'll be honest with you.
that's very fair. So for Speedy 100 and 300, once you download Ruby, you don't need to hop online to be able to use it. Again, the only times you need to be online is to either download an update or to perform a firmware update on the machine. But aside from that, you don't actually need an internet connection to run Ruby. It is a local host connection. So you are communicating via cable to the machine directly. Our software simply opens up in Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome. It doesn't mean that it does need a network connection to work or operate the machine. With the run on Ruby machines, it is a bit different since the machines are directly connected to the network infrastructure of the customer, whether they have a company or their own private home. This is the reason why we need to be within the same network of our machine to be able to use it remotely. So that means we need to use the same IP that the machine is on to be able to interface with it. Once the machine is connected into the network, we do have specific, not to get too deep into the IT framework, but again, we share the same. It shares DNS and subnetwork frameworks to communicate with the machine. So we're still connecting to the internal PC of the computer. So it's still a very similar system to if we were to remotely connect to our PC on a Speedy 100 and 300 machine. So in terms of cybersecurity, you're still working within the same network configuration of your home and or company. Very rarely do we have times where Ruby is blocked out by a firewall, and these are usually within areas such as schools or high-end like private customers. So I believe we have some military-based customers that are blocked off by the firewall for Ruby. So that simply is contacting your ISP to make sure that Ruby is unblocked from this firewall. And once it's unblocked, it's easily accessed through the same network.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to mention that, I mean, as you said, very much machine dependent and customer dependent, but there are some options where Ruby does not necessarily always have to be online. And another question that I've certainly received in the past, that Ruby is not a subscription based of any sort.
Yeah.
So there's no sort of monthly subscription, anything like that. You're not going to lose access to Ruby, anything of this nature. It is a software that you're installing, regardless of sort of network connectivity, put one, to one side, but it is a software that you're installing in the same way you're installing, Photoshop or anything else, and you have access to that as long as you've got your laser up and running. I wanted to.
I want to add on to that a little bit, Don, just so everyone kind of understands that Ruby, it's not cloud-based. It is network-based, so only works in your local network. It's not something that go out to the internet and access it from the internet. Somebody can hack in, has to go off and on. So your system can be completely offline. You can have a local network and not have the internet. Laser Ruby can run and will run without the internet, even in your house. And so, yes, it won't update, but you can run it. It's not cloud-based. We're not communicating anywhere besides your local network, which is computer to computer within your building alone. Just want to make sure everyone understands that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, actually. I think that's a good point to point out. This quick question I want to come back to from Max, and I might ask you, Max, to kind of elaborate just a little bit more in order to make sure that I'm understanding. But if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think Max had installed Ruby for their Speedy 100, their 80 watt, and suddenly they're finding that the parameters that they're using in Ruby are different than the parameters they're using in job control. So perhaps they're having to add, a higher percentage of power in Ruby than they were using in job control, or vice versa. Dave, would you have any thoughts on why?
Yeah, I mean, the speed parameters should be the same. I mean, the only thing I can think is the materials database may be a little bit different. And just note that your old database that you have in job control, you can import all those parameters into your Ruby software. So say, for example, for years, you've kind of developed, massaged, manipulated your settings and parameters so that they meet your liking perfectly. And then you install Ruby, and then you're kind of back to the presets that may or may not be exactly how you like your material to work with. Make sure you operate. And I have a video on our YouTube channel that walks you through how to install basically a custom parameter or parameters to your Ruby software. It's a very simple process, click of a button, and then you can literally upload all your job control versions directly into Ruby. So any of those parameters that you've modified, massaged, manipulated, changed over the years can be brought in. Ruby is the same speed parameters, acceleration parameters that you were using in job control, so there should not be any difference between the two softwares. But if the settings aren't the same, it may be that your job control had been modified over the years. Just make sure you bring those in. Yeah.
So again, and it varies from person to person. Your mileage may vary, but if you've done any work, as Dave says, to kind of set up special settings, special parameters in your job control, I would encourage you to bring them over. It's very easily done, as Dave says, and then also you're not having to restart all that hard work that you've already put in. To making sure that your customers get exactly what it is that they're looking for. I wanted to sort of touching on the differences between job control and Ruby. I want to throw this over to Tim, if I may, because Tim, I will say, has done quite a few customer trainings here in Canada. And so this is a question that I've gotten a few times, certainly. If somebody has some machines that are already running on job control and they're ready to make the jump to Ruby, how would you say that learning curve is? Should I set some time aside? Will I be able to just kind of pick up and go? What's that learning curve and experience like?
Yeah. The learning curve is thankfully not as steep because in principle, the softwares do identical things. They're just meant to operate the laser. The largest learning curve will still have to be in the material database, though. I noticed that is the area that from a job control user over to a Ruby user is the biggest sort of change, because it's almost inverted in the way the style of the softwares are implementing what the machine's going to be doing. Aside from that, also learning the actual process that Ruby is trying to implement and trying to find little tricks and secrets, because Ruby has its own little tricks and secrets everywhere that job control did not really have. And of course, learning where all of the older job control functions are now hidden away in Ruby. For example, job controls minimize the job size, which is the equivalent of Ruby's fit to design, is in a completely different stage of the laser processing than it is in Ruby. The rotary mode is also in a completely and different way of starting it. Even the vision cameras, they're all in very different areas. And over time, of course, because there's still going to be some sort of UI adjustment to Ruby as more features are added, but just to ease up use for users. But these little things are hidden away everywhere, and having either a trainer like me or someone else, whoever is running trainings in the country you're in, having them point out where those differences are is very, very helpful. So the learning curve, thankfully, not too steep. It's the same applications, same app. You're still doing exactly the same thing as both softwares are doing. It's just learning about the material database for the most part, because that is the trickiest part of the software. Yeah. And then all the little buttons that are hidden away. So where it's enhanced geometries, where's inner geometries first, where are all these things hidden away now.
So I'm gonna derail this here for a minute and ask a selfish question myself then on that exact topic. Can you explain to me what an effect is in Ruby and when and how I might use them? Because it was a word that I wasn't familiar with before coming to Ruby, and I've since become a convert, but I think
Right.
because it's a new terminology, I think it's worth kind of maybe briefly diving into. There we are.
Right. So in a material library, so in the past in our different software, if you are not familiar with our previous software, I'm not going to bring it up since it is a bit way different. So Ruby uses 3 separate columns of information to help you organize your materials. So the leftmost column is called effect. An effect carries 2 bits of information, the name of the effect and the process that is going to be in charge of. So the effect itself never brings in any colors. It never brings in any material settings. It only assigns and distributes the name and the effect that's going to be running. So in this example that I made for plywood, not perfect examples, I was just making a tutorial for a customer, but this effect name, for example, is engraved quality. This is a default effect name you're going to see that Trotec has supplied. And essentially, effect names are just used to help you organize what your layers are going to be running, what each effect is going to be doing. So in this case, engraved quality, I've made it so that in this effect, engraved quality effect, it's truly going to have the higher quality of engraving. So we can see here, it of course has the name of engraved quality. It's carrying the process of engraving, and we've assigned a color to it. So if I have the color black in my design file, the engraved quality effect is actually going to snag that black color, and it's going to run anything that's black in my file with 60% power and 100% speed. Anything that is blue and green, for example, the dark effect layer is going to snap that. And anything that's blue and green in my designs can be ran with 50% power and 50% speed. And then right below that, I have a cut finally. So anything that is a line and the color red, so anything that's red will be snagged onto the cut layer. If it's a line, it'll be cut. If it's a vectored object, for example, the machine will ignore it. But in this case, an effect is just meant to organize what your material setting is going to be doing. It carries the name and the process, what we're trying to accomplish. And they're either added by default into the material library that Trotec has supplied, or we could add in our own effects. So for example, we're trying to engrave on a piece of wood, let's say, and we want 2 different styles of engraving. We want one darker one lighter finish. We could add an effect to our material. We could enter a name at the very top of the list, select the process we want to run, and then once we hit OK, it adds it to our material setting as another layer, so another line of setting. So for example, if I want to add a speed engraving, I'll add based off the arrow, and we can see here again it brings in 0 power, 100% speed, so the settings are not going to do anything. We have no colors that it's going to automatically snag, so we have to assign a color that it's going to grab. We have to assign it a power. So now anything that is a dark forest green in my file will be automatically grabbed by the engraved speed setting and ran with those power, speeds, and the advanced settings that I choose along with it.
I like too that which one of these was made by Tim Custom? Engraved speed, engraved quality, cut quality, or dark?
One thing I do want to add about this is you need to people. This is a very confusing thing because the effect is nothing but a title, and it's a title you assign for an operation. So if you assign deep engraving, if it's not deep engraving, it's literally just the name that is there. You can change it to anything you want. So if you want to make an effect kiss cutting, so you're cutting through a sticker material and not all the way through, and you assign it, you would change the effect and add the word kiss cut and then assign that color to kiss cut. This actual effect does nothing for you. All it's doing is assigning a title to the operation should you like. Sometimes I just put a number there, 1, 2, 3. If I'm doing like a general parameter set, I just assign it a number. So it doesn't necessarily have to be anything. It doesn't actually do anything to you, with exception of one effect. And if you click on the effect there, since I don't have control here, there is one effect that will do it, is the mask. When you click on mask, what happens is this one will assign a color, and you can assign a color to a mask for basically an operation, but it assigns 0 power settings. And so you can use this as basically a reference color, for example. And no color will be assigned to that. No parameters will be assigned to that. That's the only one that can actually make a change to this. All the rest of them are just a title based on what you want that effect to be, and that's it. So if you're not sure what it does, just kind of ignore it. If you want to assign a name to it that it best describes your operation, that's what it's for.
Gotcha. Dave, I have a quick firmware follow-up question I noticed here in the chat, so I want to throw this out to you. Artistic Gifts USA mentions for the firmware, which option would I select if my machine's serial panel does not mention the wiring diagram?
Oh, that is a good question. And there is a lot of difficulty when it comes to selecting the correct firmware. And in that case, I would contact your support department. They can bring up your machine and tell you exactly the model diagram based on the age and stuff like that. We do have that in the database. Some of the older machines may not have all that pertinent information there. And what I do suggest is once you do find that out, write it down so that you kind of know what the version is, and then the actual number, reference, if you have a fiber laser, type of fiber laser, age of laser. Sometimes it may not be on there. You are correct on some of the older models, but yes, and that's where you would contact your support department. Do me a favor and write it down from then on, and then you can just use that same one from then on.
Yeah,
and that's a mistake that I've made. So
yes, so have I.
By that,
I would always recommend reaching out to tech support. Mostly because there are a lot of similar firmwares that have very similar names, and the only difference would just be one motor, and that's not listed on the wiring diagrams. So you may have the correct firmware, but you may not be using the right firmware for the X motor that is sitting in your machine. So make sure to always reach out. We're always here to help. We'll of course ask confirming questions to make sure that the right firmware is being uploaded to your machine. We're not going to give you the wrong one. Do not worry.
Yeah, and you do not want to put the wrong one in because I couldn't tell you what it may cause. So you make certain it is correct before moving forward.
Yeah, not to scare anyone. The machine just won't work.
Yeah,
it just won't. It won't reference.
It's not going to implode.
Yeah, do not worry.
On a slightly lighter note, this is one where I do not know, so I'm hoping you guys can help me here. Paul asks, is there a way to change the remote access folder name from the user account email address to another, perhaps more meaningful name such as Speedy100 remote access folder? So it's not, again, I'm spoiled in as much as I have several lasers here in the showroom that I can use, so I don't have to do as much remote access. Do you guys know of any plans or any ability to change any of the kind of custom folder names, or is it maybe necessary that Ruby's referencing back to them so they have a particular nomenclature? Or
I've never come across this, and the run on Ruby machines you can't do that at all. But the plugged-in machines you can use the remote folder, and what they mean by that is you'd be able to literally just drag or save files into a folder. When you go into Ruby, they just show up. But as for changing the name and reference, I've never tried that. Tim, have you come across any need or tried changing the name to do that?
I don't think I have. I'm actually not entirely sure what they are trying to address. So
besides changing the name of the folder, so maybe it's easier to reference. Try going in and actually locating that folder and changing the name. I can't see why changing the name would change the links and where it's actually located. It should still work by changing the name. But don't quote me on that. Give that a try because I have not tried it.
Just scroll through more great questions here. I want to shout out really quickly Johnny from our UK branch. Also, thank you for grabbing some of the questions in the chat. Very, very much appreciated. We had a message here from Tyler thanking you, Tim, for the answer on the network security and just mentioning God bless you for not calling SAAS. 100% couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
A question here from Ashford Lasers 2, just coming right back around to this. Asking about the potential for a 3D layer element for creating layers. So, for example, creating foam inserts for toolboxes or for presentation boxes. Dave, I'm going to throw this over to you. I mean, obviously, we can't say for sure whether or not a 3D layer element, let's say, is going to get added to Ruby. But if this were a job that you were going to approach in Ruby, how much you go about it if it was, like a 3D item or a...
Yeah. I mean, I see what they're saying. I mean, typically, like when you're doing toolbox foam, for example, you would typically have more than one layer. And that can be identified by, in a design software, you could identify by a layer and you can literally shut those layers off, work on it. And this way, each one of the layers kind of line up with each other and you can make sure they line up together. Ruby kind of sort of does that. And you could do that by color. And so if they were all on top of each other and each layer was a separate color, Ruby automatically identifies each color as a separate layer. And you'll notice on the right side of Ruby, it identifies each color as a separate layer. And you can shut them off, you can delete them. And then you can, if you could, of course, when you bring it into your main prepare screen, you can identify that you want to run one layer, then shut the other layer off, and then run the next one and the next one, even though they may be overlapping each other. And so what I would suggest is when you design your graphic, overlapping in your design software, even though they may be all the same color, when you send that file or save that file to Ruby, make sure they're 3 different separate colors. And all 3 colors can be assigned to the same power parameter. But the difference is each color can then be shut off and then run separately on top of each other as you place the different foam in, so that you don't have to worry about alignment or positioning. They can all be put in the machine. So it kind of works in that way, but not the same way, say, a layer feature would work in a design software.
100%. I think that's a great answer. We're getting close to the hour here, so I'm going to try and speed run some of these questions. Tim, sir, question from another Tim, actually. For Timothy, do the Ruby colors have specific RGB values? And to add to this really quickly, not asking for myself at all, but I know that in job control, I could hover over the color and get me the RGB value. Where might I find these RGB values in Ruby if I were somebody who didn't know where to find them?
Right. Well, unfortunately, there are no.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah, we can't simply find the RGB values in Ruby. If you do need these specific values, we do have them. So if you do, I have a photo of all the RGB values that we use. Again, in job control, they're very easy to find. In Ruby, they're not as easy to find. And the main reason for that is because we could simply open up our design in the design page and change it to the right RGB color if we need to. Understandably, this is not as effective sometimes. We just need to get the right color right out of the door. So if you do need the right RGB values, reach out to our tech support teams, whichever is local to your country. They can either provide you with the photo with the RGB values or send them to you directly.
Okay,
I know we will offer like a color palette pre-set up for the common softwares. Illustrator, we have one. CorelDRAW, we have one. This way, when you're designing it in there and then bringing it in, it has those RGB values automatically.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, if you're ever unsure, you know for sure automatically you have 4 without having to question it all, because you have full red, full green, full blue, and then black with 0 across them all. So you don't have to worry about any of the color.
Yeah, standard RGB values will always work. So RGB red would be 25500 RGB, which is the R stands for red. 255 would be black. Because it's 00 or. I may be wrong on there, but yeah, each one of them, you can just use the standard RGB values and you'll get 6 or 7 colors that will work as long as they match ours.
Yep, 100%. Quick question for you, Dave. Candace asks if you can run Ruby without the laser being turned on, adding new material settings or doing some design work in the design process.
Yeah. I mean, you can operate Ruby. It depends on which type of laser it is. The run on Ruby machines, if the machine is turned off, the screen's off, believe it or not, it's still running in the background. So you can still access it. You can still run it. You can still have access to that. Now, if you have a non-run on a Ruby machine and that computer is completely shut off, then no. And then you're running from a remote PC somewhere, you will not have access to that Ruby. So if you have a run-on Ruby laser machine and it is in the machine and it's completely turned off, any computer in that network can still access Ruby. Now, any computer on a network will still need to have that original computer turned on if it's a non-run-on Ruby. So, for example, you have the computer plugged into the machine and you're running from your MacBook Pro down up in your office. That original computer will need to be at least on in order for you to access it.
Yep. What I've also found, if you actually even if you have a run a Ruby machine, if you download Ruby and connect your machine to it, you can still open up the application as you would, because then your computer would sort of become the host connection. The only the only thing is with a run on Ruby machine, if you have Ruby directly installed on your computer, you can't connect to the machine with that version of Ruby. You still have to use the remote access version of Ruby.
Quick question for you, Tim, from Wood Designs. How is the materials list sorted? And is it possible to sort in alphabetical order, or potentially even just, is there a way to do like a custom sort for the materials list?
Unfortunately not. No, it is. It is sorted by how the materials are made. So whichever one's made, it just adds to the top of that list. Now they do get reorganized if you were to export the materials and re-import them back in. However, this seems to be at random. It does not seem to be alphabetical at all.
Now, the nice thing is they are searchable, and you can identify specific ones as your favorite. So those will show at the top, and the top 3 most commonly used will also show at the top, making it more useful. That was a feature I added because of that same problem, having to search for it every single time you went in. But yeah, there's no specific order, as Tim said. But great question, and it's something I think we maybe want to propose.
Definitely. I will say there are certain like quality of life updates to Ruby. I will say that I think sometimes take a backseat to some of the stuff that is more production based. But definitely never hesitate if there's a quality of life thing you see, like an alphabetical sorting. Never hesitate to send that to us and let us know that that's something you'd like to see. Because I guarantee you, if it's something that you would like to have, probably somebody at Trotec, like the 3 of us, would like to see it as well.
Absolutely. Hey, Don, can you show them where to do that?
Absolutely. Well, and I wanted to pull up this great question from Paul. Is there a Ruby-specific support email address? So, Dave, you mentioned earlier, is it Ruby Help? I'm going to pretend I don't know the URL. Yeah,
rubyhelp.com is the website specifically for help. Yeah, go to rubyhelp.com. It's also accessible directly from Ruby. But this is going to give you all the pertinent information, the updates, features. I've recently asked them to post a lot of my training videos in there. Right now, it's just a lot of descriptions and stuff, and it is constantly being updated and changed.
Definitely, don't miss out. And then another quick question here. Forgive me, we're just getting to the top of the hour, so I want to grab as many as I can. Again, just a huge thank you to everybody who's watching, whether now here live or in the feature on YouTube. So glad that you're doing this every 3rd Thursday of the month for the coming months. So we hope you'll join us again in the coming ones.
Yeah, we're going to keep doing this until the questions stop coming.
Yes, and we've got a good list. We've been building up a list here in the background while we're going, so not to worry, there's going to be more to come. Can you post the colors in the chat? By all means, go absolutely nuts. If we have to sort through the chat, then that's fine. But the chat will be here available on the page, even in the future, so people can always reference back and find them if need be. If there's one other, we'll tell you what. Is there, as we're getting to the top here, we've gotten through most of the chat questions for the day. Dave, I'll go to you first. Is there a particular question that we didn't get to answer yet that you get quite a bit of, or you would like to see answered? Tim, I'll let you think about it for a minute. I'll throw out mine first if you like. Yeah. You guys can answer me if you don't mind. It's one that I've heard a lot about recently. We touched on it very, very briefly. It's the rotary. How do I keep the rotary from rotating partway around through the rotary engraving process? I know it's a bug that we had previously. It's something that we had some customer feedback on, and has been a high priority for us to look at fixing. Tim or Dave, I don't know which one of you would feel more comfortable in answering. Maybe I'll throw it to Tim really quick first.
Well, and I answered that earlier with the firmware update. That problem has been completely resolved. But the drawback is, even if you update your version to the 2.6, which is the version that solved that issue, if you don't upgrade your firmware, the problem will still persist. I ran into that, and I kept saying, it's still doing it. And they're like, okay, did you update your firmware? Once I updated the firmware, the problem went away. We now have continuous rotation. So what that means is it will rotate. It will not kind of stop partway through, rotate around, and then start engraving again. And if your diameter is not perfect, you're going to then get a little line or an overlap. So that problem was frustrating. It really was. And it was designed a specific way, but they've now changed that. And so that it rotates correctly. It doesn't rotate back around, and it will continue to wrap. And so if you want to do something that's 500 degrees and have it rotate around and around and around, it'll continue to rotate as long as your graphic continues around. So you can go well beyond 360 now. And it works flawlessly from my experience so far.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you. Was there a particular, no need to, I don't want to put you on the spot here, Dave, but was there a question at all that you wanted to make sure we covered off that we hadn't had a chance to address just yet?
The one that I had quite a few people ask at my last one, and I forgot to actually post a video, was how to use the markers in the actual prepare screen. So many people, I forgot to show that during my last training course. And so I've actually prepared a video on how to use the markers. And so if we could play that, I think that would be helpful for those folks that had that question. Then, because it's not something that's quick and easy to just fire up a machine and show on a camera. So I went ahead and created one.
Let me share I've got it here. Forgive me, guys. My bad.
You got the video?
I do. Press screen markers.
The laser machine. Then move the laser head over the product and focus. This tutorial will cover how to use markers in the Ruby Prepare screen. Markers are a convenient tool used for determining multiple exact locations using the red dot pointer inside the laser machine. Place a product in the laser machine, then move the laser head over the product and focus. Noting where the red laser pointer shows under the laser focus head, use the arrow keys on the laser's keyboard to visually move the focus head and the red dot pointer to the desired location. Ensure the file is saved, or the markers will not work. Once the location is determined, select the F8 button on the computer's keyboard. This will apply a visual marker on the Prepare screen. Then move the red pointer to the next location and again select the F8 key for a second marker. Repeat this process as many times as needed to determine any required locations on the field. Markers can also be selected with the computer mouse, turning them red, and at that point they can be deleted by selecting the computer delete button. Once all markers are determined, these markers will act as anchor points, allowing designs and drawings to snap to them. For this example, I will select the box tool, turn on snapping, and draw a box, snapping to the 4 markers I just created. Once done, open or specify the design and size and scale it to fit. Then snap that design into the newly created marker-based location box in this example. Once positioned, select the material, in this example pine wood, then turn off the red cut setting so it will not be cut, as this example box only needs to be used for a location reference in this case. Push the file to the laser, then push start on the laser to process the job. Markers are an extremely accurate way to determine the orientation of a product, and they can even be more accurate than the overhead camera. Markers can be used anytime within the Prepare screen and as many as needed to complete the job accurately. Once the engraving is complete, as you can see, it produces a perfectly accurate engraving utilizing this technique. All right, thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a really good point, and something that, you know, maybe was an underappreciated feature, I think, sometimes, but markers can be a lifesaver.
Oh, it is absolutely wonderful because that red dot pointer gives you much more accuracy, especially when you got curvature and variations where the camera can't be as accurate. The marker is going to give you a lot more accuracy and then snappability. And then when you save that file and you go back in there, they'll still be there, especially if you're running a product up against the ruler or something and want that repeatability that way. So definitely a useful tool.
100%. Tim, how about yourself? Again, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but was there a question in particular you thought maybe would be worth covering? Make sure we didn't miss it out.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to cover a hidden feature that's not really meant to be used this way. So
I like it.
yeah, so Timothy actually pointed out he mentioned that hopefully in an update we can group objects within a layer so we can select and move them together. And the really lovely thing is that sometimes our developers don't really tell us what they've implemented into the software. So this comes from just any knowledge of a graphic design software in general. Grouping an object involves selecting the 2 objects and using a separate function just to hold these 2 objects together. Now, the really, really cool thing about Ruby is that we can actually group objects using a tool that was not designed to group objects together. So right here we can see I have 2 separate Trotec logos. They're each independent. And if I select them both, and I actually head up to the Union tool, which is one of our graphic design element tools, if I click on that, it will weld the 2 objects together. So now I can move them both as one object. Now, there's a drawback with this, of course, since it's not intended to be used as a grouping tool. Let's say these 2 Trotec logos were overlapping, it would weld these 2 together and create an overlapped shape. So as long as the 2 objects are not overlapping each other, you can group them by using the Union tool.
It's a great hack.
It's a great hack.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. Great job, Tim. Thank you.
Yeah.
Believe me, I've spent a year and a half on this software. So it's just looking and trying to find every tiny little thing.
Yeah.
Actually, with that being said, of course, the snap markers, I know it's not really looked at too often, but every page of Ruby has a keyboard shortcut button. So if you are ever wondering, what does each button on my keyboard do on this page? The keyboard shortcut button is very specific to the page that you're on in Ruby. So each page has different keyboard shortcuts. They're all hidden away in this area. They're never really talked about or mentioned or shown how to use. So they're all available to you, just hidden away in this little question mark icon.
Yeah, hit that question mark. Yeah, that's something that originally you had to hit the question mark on the computer screen. And I actually asked them to add that question mark because no one knew that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Dang. That's really cool. I'm going to go do that right now. Listen, again, a huge thank you from the three of us and everybody here at Trotec, for everybody for joining us. Again, I think in the next day or two, we're going to try and add to the description of this video, but then also hopefully in an email that will go out, a link for you guys to submit your own questions if they should come up to you when we're not online or we're not doing the stream. But, again, every third Thursday of the month for at least the next foreseeable few months, we're going to be doing these, and we'd invite you guys to please come on back, join us. They'll always be available on the YouTube channel after the stream. But, if you can join us live, it's always appreciated when you guys can submit your great questions. And a huge thank you again for all the great questions we got this week. We didn't realize we were going to get quite so many. We prepared a whole bunch we didn't even get to yet. So
for sure,
there's more good stuff to come. But, a huge thank you to both Tim and Dave for coming on and doing this with me. I know you guys are both very, very busy, and I also work here. So it's always appreciated to get together and do this. A huge, huge thank you also to Corey and to Lev on the back end for helping us with the videos, the production, getting everything set up. We really look forward to seeing you guys again next month. I believe it will be on Thursday. I believe it's the 16th. Let me double check. Thursday, the 17th of August.
There you go. Mark your calendars, everyone.
There you are. Use the marker tool like Dave taught you.
Right. Yeah. Use your marker tool to mark your calendars for next month. Ruby software training.
And we very much look forward to seeing you guys again then. If not before that, as Tim was saying, reach out to your support department. We're here to help even when we're not online. And we look forward to the next time we can do one of these. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We will see you again next time.